Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is September 24, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. And we want to thank Beyond Baroque for having K.R. Morrison reader poems there, and that's where we met. So thanks to that great center. K.R., where in the heck you calling in from today?
I'm down near Dana Point. I have a place I call Mermaid Town in South Laguna. I'm very close to Dana Point when I stay down here. So
How cool is that? So we went over a lot in part one. I've just changed my format in doing these part twos, and I never really listened to my interviews in the past, but I just like to keep doing them. And so now I have to kind of force myself to listen so I know that I don't repeat too many questions or cover ground we already covered.
I understand.
So I don't know. I'm just curious. Did you listen to part one?
I have not. I must confess.
That's all right. I'm not saying you should or anything.
Well, I must confess a secret to you. I don't listen to any of podcasts I'm on.
Yeah.
I just
that's fine.
I get too much in my head and I get too much imposter syndrome. And then I start, yeah. So
No, I like that imposter syndrome.
I turn them loose into time fluidity and then let them be what they are.
Yeah. Well, no, it helps me because that's exactly what I did by not listening to mine in the past. But it was fun and it was really enlightening. And, we did cover your backstory in the tipping point where you got into music and specifically drumming. And we talked about poetry a little, but let's jump right into poetry. You talked in part one about poetry that you were writing in dealings with your youth, and you didn't really realize, you said, that you were like writing poetry. It was just like coming out of you, and it wasn't like this conscious thing. So then in 2021, you released your book, Cauldrons, a book of poems. So where was that tipping point between your youth and there where you said consciously, I'm going to write poems, like a little more deliberately, or however the right word is?
There's a country of life between those two eras. So when I brought up not really knowing I was writing poems, that was being a girl, a small girl.
Yeah.
And by the time Cauldrons came out, there's a world of living in between. So I had been writing conscientiously what I would characterize as poetry. Maybe 15 years or so prior to that book. I spent, like a lot of writers, or I hear a lot of writers say this, well, not writers in the community as poets, but people that end up in workshop and people that sort of sneak into open mics and sort of summon that courage. I hear them say, I write for me. I don't write this for other people. And, it's enough to just write them in my journal and keep them as a way of release. And I do think that there's some power to that. And, by virtue of what like a sort of incantation and a spelling of stuff can do, and why we need to be really mindful when we vent out lyrically about a lacking mindset. You want to really try to evoke you want to try to evoke a manifesting, So, and I remember being one of those people thinking that's why I wrote. And I taught high school English lit and creative writing and published every year anthologies as students. I was very much an advocate for publishing youth poetry. But I still thought, it's just fine that I write it for myself. And then my mother was close to passing and told me, it doesn't belong to you. I shared some of my work with her at Via Elena, which was her last place she rested before she passed. And she really liked the poems. She was very moved by them and told me, we were talking about the poetry, and I said, it's just for me, just for, and she said, it's not yours. It doesn't belong to you. And that it's a very spiritual belief that I've allowed to like shape my journey as an artist. It doesn't belong to me. And you learn that when you have friends, comrades, or just people who buy your book tell you, oh, that poem really spoke to me and this is why. And it went somewhere that I didn't intend. And that's, so that's what I characterize the big difference between myself as a poet now and back before, is knowing that we're all part of this just magical cauldron.
Yeah.
Pun intended, of messages,
It's a beautiful word. Have you ever listened to Carolyn Casey on Pacifica? Check her out because she uses that word a lot. And she's sort of like feminist, environmentalist, kind of new agey, but she's had 25 years of radio on KPFA up there in Berkeley. And it's a compassionate Coyote Network News. It's amazing.
Who is she? What's her name?
Caroline Casey, Casey, Coyote Network News.
In my old political organizing days, I was on KPFA.
I figure we're going to get into politics, but her line is compassionate trickster. And I just know from what you've talked about, in the word cauldron resonates with both of you. But, was this, say, 15 years ago, you started publishing kids' poems or youth poems, and did you start putting your poems out and reciting them live, or did that come a little later? You just were publishing your poems or putting them in? No, okay. When did I don't want to say performing, but reading the poems out loud come?
I'm really a late bloomer, which, given the history of my life, is nothing inconsistent. I've been a late bloomer with everything. But no, I started submitting and performing in the Bay Area after my mom passed. So sometime briefly after 2015.
Oh, I see. 2015. Yeah.
I mean, I'd been writing a lot by then.
Yeah.
I actually had a full length collection ready when it all started. And I want to plug this because it's so important. San Francisco Creative Writing Institute really was my doorway. I plopped into there due to meeting the director, Alexandra, of that workshop organization in the city. And I took a class with Holly Hardy, who is now a poet and workshop instructor in Austin, Texas. And, just sort of all began. But, losing my mom really was sort of the, I guess I needed that loss to really jump off the cliff, Yeah.
Like kickstart. Yeah. So what's the function of poetry?
I mean, I don't know that I'm comfortable with that question, because for one, there's more than one function, and for two, I don't know. I think I used this expression last time we met. I don't know that I would trust a poet that said oh, well, this is the function of poetry. I think first, for me personally, and that's the only answer I can give you, first and foremost, the function of poetry is ritual to higher self, to higher, to community. These days, for me, the function of poetry is a kind of ritual or prayer to a society functioning by divine feminine principles as opposed to patriarchy.
Yeah.
For me, the function of poetry is healing and bringing people together. And the function of poetry, I think, is like returning us to being a student. And because so often the message that we intend gets sort of like pushed aside by the message of what this sort of threefold function of a poem, you know?
Yeah.
It's such a profoundly huge question, you know? And if you ask me in a year, I'm hopefully going to say something fresh, right? Like the function, like the question, what is the function of a poem, is a poem itself. And it's got to stay in revision, you know?
Yeah. Stay in revision. No, you covered the waterfront there. It was so amazing. You're so articulate and enlightening. It really helps me because, you know, McLuhan has this thing, the medium is the message, and it's misunderstood, but we were talking about yesterday and we've switched it to the medium is the muddle. It's the muddling, it's the mud, you know, and it's sort of like we're all swishing around in this mud, or it's a cauldron, or it's like a big soup. And so I wanted to read you two that, and it is pretentious for poets to say that, but Kenneth Rexroth said the purpose of poetry is to woo your lover and subvert the bourgeois. Which I don't, if you want to comment on it, it's fine. I just thought I'd air it because I think it's funny. And then the other one is Richard Modiani, who we talked about before, taught me this one, and I love it in so many ways. It's Gary Snyder. My task as a poet entails the work of seeing the world without language and then bringing that seeing into language.
Oh, leave it to Richard to like get right down to the juice, you know?
Isn't that is amazing. But here we go. This is Leo Bersani's study of the symbolist poet Mallarmé. And I'm always struggling with this line, and I'm just curious your thoughts on it. The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. Now there's some words in there that I could talk about before, but do you have any thoughts on that? And I can repeat it if you want.
Please repeat it, but I'm with you. Repeat it.
The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
Yeah, I love that one too. And I couldn't agree more. You know, it's I don't know who said it, but how like a broken heart is what started their poetry. But I do agree that like we're not in a system or a culture that supports art, well, specifically poetry or types of art that don't generate profit, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of suffering in that system that I think generates rebellion, and often rebellion takes the form of becoming an artist and becoming either writers or painters or, so I couldn't agree with that one more.
Yeah, it's sort of like, I kind of like that poetry and experimental film, you can't make a living, because if you could, maybe it would affect the art form. Now, there's two lines that I love to repeat too, is Flipside magazine, the great punk magazine from LA. Al Flipside said, "Don't sell out, sneak in."
Yeah.
And then I love it. And the other one is Paul Schrader, who wrote Taxi Driver. He said the role of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail. Now I'm glad you can laugh, because in a way most people go, that's so cool, but it's like, it's almost a little pretentious saying my art is so pure that I tried to sell out, but it's so pure that I failed just it wouldn't sell. So it's like, who judges what poetry sells?
Yeah. Well, and also I want to be careful with this one, but we're in internet world now, and so we've got Insta poetry.
Yeah.
We like what I think. Well, I'll speak for myself. I've appreciated it. What seems to be a kind of revival in poetry.
Yeah.
That has seemed to grown out of the pandemic. And I think that there's a lot of ingredients that made that possible. For one, the pandemic took us all home to, sort of tune in, and people were like all these publishers across the country, across the globe, actually were smart enough to generate the Zoom reading,
Yeah.
and bring us all together. But, alongside that, there's this like Insta poet movement, and the poetry of Insta poetry is different. And there's a whole conversation there about what constitutes a poem and what craft means. But there's certainly like that field of poetry happening alongside a community I'm part of, where we can't sustain ourselves off of this.
Yeah.
Or if we can, we're living pretty simply. I don't know that I'm sold. Like, I'm just gonna play devil's advocate here. I don't know that I'm sold that if we can earn a living off being poets, that it would somehow dampen the work or dampen the quality of what we're doing. I don't know that I'm sold that's the case, because I think one big like albatross around our necks is having to juggle how we pay rent with how we stay artists, and imagine what's possible when you can submerge both your feet into a completely creative life. I imagine there'd be more books, there'd be more readings, there'd be more time to sort of like tune in to generate material. And maybe I'm being a little bit optimistic, but I have rare moments now of optimism, so I'm going to claim this one and wave the optimistic flag. I don't know.
No, I love it. I agree with you. And I just threw it out there because, of course, when MTV broke, experimental filmmakers got paid a little. And, then the poetry slam movement came in, and, spoken word. It was like, you go to a concert and they go, "Are you into reggae music?" And everybody go, "Yeah." And I remember I went to one concert and someone yelled, "Are you into spoken word?" And it was like, they didn't yell, they were going to read poetry, but they called us. I says, "Yeah, we all use spoken word all the time," but they meant like poetry slam, spoken word. And, I knew all the poets, the old school poets at Beyond Baroque were kind of like pissed. Like, we don't memorize our poems. We read them off of, like this. And, we don't perform our poems. We read our poems. So, kids were doing this and making it a bigger deal. I was like, hey, if you spread the word, the gospel of poetry in whatever way, it's helping. But, how the old school.
I love how, I hope it's okay I interrupt you because you got me excited. So one of the biggest gifts that's come to me as a poet is learning more about spoken word poetry, performance poetry, and this sort of differentiation between the page poet and the performance poet. And I'm in awe and enamored by spoken word poetry and slam poets. I think that there is a magic to it. I'm going to say it. I think there's a magic to it that's far more pure and ancestrally connected to what poetry began as. It wasn't supposed to ever be on a page. It was supposed to be it was supposed to be a sort of incantation, and a sort of like a ritual in front of people, and a sort of a connecting of energy. And it's weird. I don't know if it's my age or my late bloomingness or what it is, but I can memorize other people's poems, but I have the hardest time memorizing my own.
Yeah.
And obviously I've had some mentors point out to me, no, you just need to like commit to doing it and then you'll do it, and there's some truth to that. But when like last night, there was a beautiful event for the Beatnik Ghosts anthology release, and Sparring with Beatnik Ghosts anthology release last night at Beyond Baroque. Some of the poets that got up there that either memorized their poems or had the page there and looked down a couple times, but otherwise their eyes were on the audience, their eyes were moving around the room. There's a life to it. And I think anybody that's a page poet needs to pay attention to the way we might inhibit our work if we're just staring at that page. At least that's where I'm growing into, there's something to it. And it's informed my own performance. Like I think my big thing when I read live is climbing into the words and climbing into the line structures. Yeah. It's less about performance or page poetry, but more about bringing the page to the microphone. And I find that when I do that, I read better, as opposed, because I have so much nervous energy and so much anxiety on a microphone, because I don't like the sound of my voice. So I think performance poetry, spoken word poetry is the womb of all of us,
Yeah, I bet you there were some amazing readers last night. Was Rich Ferguson there?
Yes. Oh my God, he read this.
That guy is
magic.
I've made a lot of films with him in his poetry. He's amazing.
Speaking about being a channeler and in incantation poet, I hold Rich in that category. He read the piece is in this anthology. Thankfully, he told me today, but his poem speaks about sirens, and it was just great. He is an example, though, of what I was just talking about. He memorized his piece. He brought it up there with passion, and I mean, it was a whirlwind at the podium. I'm a big Rich Ferguson fan. So
beautiful. And what you brought up just previous to your thoughts when you said I have to interrupt, please always interrupt, because if you watch our first hour, there's so many times I cut you off and I'm like, oh, you shouldn't have cut her off. But I'm trying to move it along. And it's funny, moving into these part twos, I do less cutting off. But previous, I'm like, well, we got to scrunch this into 90s, so I cut off more. But even with knowing part two, I've got. But I like when we spell the word sold out, SOUL''D, sold out, because I asked the great Craig Baldwin, a filmmaker there in San Francisco, film as an art form has been swindled by capitalism. And I says, that's just a statement. I'm not saying it's true or false. I'm just wondering your reaction. He goes, yeah, and it's our job to swindle it back. So it's like, poetry as an art form has been swindled by capitalism. It's like becomes this book and you got to sell it, and, and then what? Well, how do we swindle it back? You just give your books away. It's like, no, it costs to publish this. It feels good when you go, here's my chapbook. I made it by Xeroxing pages free at the library. Now cough up $5 or $10. So there's nothing wrong with that. We live in this world. Yes. But there was a world where it wasn't happening yet. And I'm curious, what was the motive of the cave artist or the cave poet, the cave dancers, the cave musicians? We only have really the documentation of the cave artist, these scratchings on the walls. What's your hunch or guess? What was the motive of the cave artist?
Well, I want to go back a little bit because there was a jump right there. It's
Okay.
like, I love how you said, we live in this world, but I think there's a jump when we presume that our motive is to make money.
Yeah.
And given what we make, and I include small publishers in this, and people like Daniel Yaryan last night that created this anthology, that no doubt he's not going to make what that book is worth by any means, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know that our motive is to make dough and live off this either. And in fact, whatever my answer is for the caveman might not be much different than what ours is, know. And then I also want to jump back, people like Ocean Vuong, who've like arrived, right? I mean, Ocean Vuong is in the spotlight, poets and writers level, New York University teacher now. I mean, if there is a sellout example, it would be Ocean Vuong. But if you look at Ocean Vuong's collections and you read his work, I don't think there's anything sellout about him.
Yeah.
And whether or not people hijack that for profiting means, these like upper level publishers, that I guess that's fair. That's another conversation. But there's something about his work that stays very pure despite having arrived, I've always struggled with this like sellout term, It's, we live in a system that ends up turning everything special into caricatures of itself, right? Yeah. So now there's like $2,000 bags with punk rock spokes on it. And Che Guevara can be found on a t-shirt at Urban Outfitters. And I mean, that's...
Well, let's get down to the nitty gritty, because here's the one that really got me. Patti Smith, full page ad in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, selling luggage. And I asked 25 hardcore punkers in LA, my age punk people.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? I didn't prejudice. I didn't bias it. I just said, what do you think of that? 80% of them said, well, maybe she needs the money. Well, maybe she's giving the money to a good cause. I'm like, one or two people goes, that's a fucking sellout. But she already sells her books through major publishers, but that's her poetry. That's not selling her brand as a luggage person. And even the TV commercial that went along with it was like, I'm Patti Smith and I like these luggage because it's got rollers and stuff. So, that to me was an issue. And there's another poet that's huge at Beyond Baroque. I don't want to go into it, but it is, I'm just curious people's feelings. Like Zappa said, Frank Zappa said it well. He says, I make this music for myself. If other people like it, that's a bonus. Yeah, well, right. But that's him, in my opinion, and you brought this up, over romanticizing the creative process, because he knows if he writes a song with these notes and these melody or this construction, kids will buy it, and then he can go make more music. He can utilize his income to keep making because he's driven to make music. But he's, in my opinion, he's not really saying the big picture. He was raised in a consumer capitalism society. We're not able to live outside of that because we're so in it. We're like fish swimming in water. We don't know we're in water. We don't realize we're in a capitalism consumer culture. So, I don't like capitalism, but of course it's part of who we are and what we do. So how do we flip it? Maybe, or how do we utilize it to like Kenneth Rexroth says, subvert the bourgeois? I use poetry to subvert the bourgeois. So sorry to go on that rant.
No, I appreciate the rant. Like the function of poetry question, I think there's a lot of answers to it. I certainly think creating poetry that calls attention to the bourgeois is certainly a wonderful way to subvert it.
Yeah.
What I see activists doing all the time in readings is a great way to subvert it. Creating incantations of healing around social justice issues that are the wounds of that very system, or that receive the wounds of that very system. That is a good way to subvert it.
Yeah.
I don't know that, like, if we end up feeding our kids with the creativity, suddenly we're not subversive. I don't buy into that. I don't buy into that. Patti Smith there was a video that was going around the Instagram of Patti Smith talking about making it, or being able to make money off her work. And I fucking loved it. And pardon my French, but I shared it all over my medias because, she's like, fuck you guys. Like, if I'm going to make money, I'm going to make money. Like, let me fucking eat with my craft.
Right.
Let me eat with my craft.
Right.
And I think that's something very different than talking about a system and a structure in place that does in fact turn us into spectacles for means of profit. And you can have the two conversations at once, and I don't know that one contradicts the other. But I love what she had to say about it.
Yes. I love Patti. She's very articulate and she's politically active. She speaks up and she's praised Finnegan's Wake big time. So I'm totally into her. I've followed her since day one, but it's not as bad as Iggy Pop. He sells car insurance. It's like, we already knew Iggy was a fucking sellout years ago. At least luggage isn't car insurance. But, Samuel Johnson said, no human but a blockhead ever wrote except for money. And I love to go to that quote just because it's the other extreme, that these people know, romanticize the writing process all you want, but people in the long run can make their living writing. So it's sort of, the other one I love is the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can. So that's something. McLuhan, go ahead.
I'm still dwelling on the can make a living, do your writing. I mean, and I can be an NBA basketball star too. Like, it's that hard. Yeah. So, and that's okay. Like,
I agree.
It's like, there's so many things we can do to, I'm so careful. I just do not ever want to become that snobby person that thinks I'm important enough to where this needs to be resolved. Like, given what the nation is going through and what most families endure, they can't even afford to have these conversations. They can't afford to even sit down and write what they went through that day, or even put the energy or words to it, given what they endure due to the system that we're discussing. This whole conversation is romanticized, and that's the American reality. And so,
no, that's good. And what my whole motive is to suss out ideas, and I'm not trying to clam onto them and say, I believe this or believe that. I love, but we do have our biases, and I am a hypocrite. I know it. I say, have suspended judgment, be a comprehensivist, air out the big picture. But I know I have biases, and I do. I really flip back to Duchamp. He says, I'm going to contradict myself so I don't conform to my own ideas.
Oh, I love that.
That's is that a cheap out, or is that like a beautiful rationalization? I think it's both. and it is beautiful. But it's two more little quotes about art. I was curious, and one's an artist and one is a poet. And the artist is who they named the gallery upstairs at Beyond Broke is Mike Kelly. And I interviewed him with all these questions twice. He says art is making your problems other people's problems. I'm glad you can laugh. Any comments on that? Or poetry is making your problems other people's problems? Any thoughts on that?
I don't agree.
Good.
I think it's the other way around. I think poetry, I'm not going to speak for other genres of art because I'm a poet, but I think if, at least for me, if I'm doing it right, poetry accesses what are problems bigger than my peon little life, and problems that are human ones, that are romantic ones, or are women ones, or are capitalist ones, right? It's like, so we're tapping into something that's a bigger problem than just ourselves. At least for me, that's the poetry I try to write. And it really is back to the beginning of this part 2 podcast. What differentiates me as an artist now compared to when I was writing poems before my mom passed, a partner, a lover may break my heart. I'm writing things that are bigger than that now. And in fact, it's rare that I'll write about a lover. Like they have to really be tapping into some sort of inner child, something or other, or some sort of soul contract for them to earn a page, as opposed to the old days where, said lover does this and I get inspired, right? And that's definitely making my problem the world's problem, right? But I think now I'm not going to speak for my job, at least for me, is to tap into what we need, what deserves words and what deserves a page and what deserves a good read,
It's good. I got to recommend one book that just came out, Cosmic Scholar, about Harry Smith, and one of the most amazing artists ever. But he basically said, music changed America. Poetry for me was changed my America because I started reading Daniel Berrigan. That was political poetry, and it changed me and helped politicize me. And I'm proud of that because I was like a normal kid. Like, what is poetry? I found some notes when I was a kid in school, and it says I'm getting into poetry, and I was like, how? I had no memory of that. Like, this is weird. But this other poet, go ahead.
I was going to say Victor Surge and Marge Piercy were those for me. Victor Surge and Marge Piercy made me see the function of poetry in changing the world. And I'm not going to go so far as to call it revolutionary work, because I do believe like actual tactile action makes you, that's revolutionary work. But it's
like Sonia Sanchez. You ever read Sonia Sanchez?
I have, yes.
She like kicks my butt. She's like, holy moly. Or, Amira. Actually, I was lucky enough to ask all these same questions to Amira Baraka too. He was Leroy Jones, and then he changed his name to Amira Baraka. But he's one of the most revolutionary Black poets of all time.
I know who you mean. Who you mean. Yeah. Yes.
But there's KR, there's a poet, her name is Fannie Howe. She said, the point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't. Now, I don't, yeah, I don't get it, but I'm just curious your thoughts. The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't.
It sounds like a phenomenologist.
What does that mean? You know,
it's a branch of philosophy. It's very deconstruction, bringing things down to its being, and sometimes in its being there is this sort of paradoxical being and not being, you know.
Yeah, there's another question I ask, and it probably fits here, is why is it so hard for humans to consider the possibility that life may be pointless? I'm not saying life is pointless. I'm saying, why is it so hard for humans to consider that it possibly may be pointless?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I love that question. In fact, I think that consideration is a necessary condition of the possibility of finding the point.
Yeah.
I don't know that we can find the point, or at least for me, I couldn't find the point without having those excursions of shadow work, those sort of Camus moments, you know?
Yeah. And then tell us the tipping point when you decided to be an educator. Because we went over drumming and music, we went over poetry, because when did that come up?
Education?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That you went into being an educator. Yeah.
I had graduated from USF, a philosophy major. I thought I wanted to work in the music industry, and I took an internship at Interscope Records in Santa Monica. And my initial reasons for wanting to try out education were very ridiculous. I discovered in the internship that driving 3 hours a day in a car to a place where I made money is not an existence I will ever live. I could, and then being there and the sort of the culture of the record label and getting to know what that looks like and what I was signing up for. That daily reality at that internship, combined with reading a lot of social justice literature at the time. 9/11 had happened, and I watched the whole country jump on this sort of bandwagon of hate to Muslim community. And I was like, I don't know if I saw or what, but I heard about the Teaching for America opportunity. And they specifically wanted prospective teachers that hadn't had degrees, hadn't done anything around any sort of bachelor's degree or anything. So they did not pick me. But I remember upon going through that process, realizing, yeah, you know, literacy definitely saved my life, and specifically reading and writing really did shape my healing process and allowed me to care about other people. Literacy allowed me to have empathy, you know, and I decided I wanted to do that. So I enrolled at Cal State Long Beach. I took a job at Los Alamitos Racetrack, and the work was mostly desk work. So I was able to petition every semester, like 21 units. So I got a credential and a second bachelor's and a minor in like 3 years at Cal State Long Beach. And the universe tumbled me back to the Bay Area into the hands of Galileo High School. I'll never forget, a friend reached out and was like, yo, this school is looking for an English teacher. You should apply. I applied. I had a job interview on a Friday, and I went in there and just spouted all my political beliefs. I was definitely a radical revolutionary thinker at the time, and I did not want the school to not know that that was the approach I was going to take in a classroom. And the principal, Margaret Chu, is just real quiet and looking at me. And she said, well, can you start on Monday? And I got to design all my curriculum there. I mean, it really just fell into place. And I had been missing the Bay Area, that small little window. I returned back down to Southern California. So yeah, I moved in one weekend and fell in love with it. I feel like teaching and students and education like kind of chose me.
Yeah.
And it really became my art form before anything else. I have such an issue with common cliched terms we use around teaching. Teachers, what is that one? Teachers don't do, they teach or something. That one cliched expression, it's just such bull. I mean, I understand we're in a war against education, and a lot of schools have what we call scripted curriculum and a lot of bureaucracy inhibiting what an instructor can do. At Galileo, that was not the case. There was, at the time, there was really an advocacy for our creativity and our ability to shape a curriculum that met the standards, but in our own way. Books that are typically banned in other parts of the country were not banned there. I've been teaching Louis Rodriguez is always running since my first day in a classroom. And yeah, I mean, I fell in love with teaching before anything else. And I don't know, the art of writing and the art of teaching really inform one another for me. Yeah. And when I take one of those out, I feel a loss on the other end. When I've taken writing sabbaticals and don't teach, my poetry suffers, you know. It's a magical journey for me as an educator. So
well put, K.R. And I've given lectures at art colleges over the years. I'm not really a professor, but I've sort of snuck in. And one thing I say is get your life and your job as mixed up as possible.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Because you know, don't take your job home with you. It's like, well, here's McLuhan in 1957, and I'm really curious your thoughts. It's misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. The distinction merely relieves people the responsibility of looking into the matter. It's like setting up the distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other pleases. However, it's always been true, whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So the key words there I'm wanting you to delve into is whatever pleases teaches more effectively. Whatever that is, and then what does pleasing mean, and what does more effectively mean? You know, and it sort of boils down to, how did you know how to teach? Did they teach you how to keep kids entertained at the classroom? Because there is some process of what is entertainment, but keeping them pleased and attentive to your, you know, curriculum or your like non-scripted curriculum. So any thoughts on that? Yeah.
Well, I think there's a difference between entertaining and pleasing, for one.
Yeah.
And, you know, a good teacher, anybody listening that's an educator would probably nod their head. It's like, my job ain't to entertain you, you know. And I mean, especially working with teens, inner city teens for all those years, and even now, like meeting up with them in the juvenile health system. I think a big part of my job becomes about deconstructing this expectation they have about being entertained as a way to learn or to enjoy themselves in a culture that's like all about entertainment, you know, and fast engagement. It's just not the reality of, in my opinion, art and growth and and self improvement, right? Now, engaging, pleasing. Yes. I mean, my thoughts about that are absolutely. And I think it comes down to us being mammals: see, touch, taste, hear, smell, right?
Yeah.
Like, we are creatures of the senses.
Yeah.
And the more that we can access those senses in a learning context, the more likely we are to engage the student. And in doing it, there's this cyclical sort of receptivity where we get engaged and pleased. Yeah. And this is why it really is a magical place. If you're doing it right, you become a student alongside them. I mean, when you're working with young people, obviously you have boundaries to ensure they know you're the instructor, right? But yeah, the pleasing part, I agree. I mean, I think that it just opens doors when something in us is triggered or sparked. Trigger's a bad word, but something, but entertain, I take issue with that word. And a lot of my work with the kids, it was like, yo, this isn't Facebook. This is not TikTok. I wouldn't have said TikTok then, but and getting them to see that the things that matter most in life, they're not going to entertain you. And because the world does not revolve around you. Like, you are the most special this was one of my famous things I'd say to my students in conference. Like, you are the most precious, most special being in the world, but you are also completely not special.
Yeah.
And learning that sort of dichotomous truth of like, you got to earn your keep. But I'm trying to watch my language. I would have used a different word there, but making my students really work and do the journey and like work hard. Everything that matters takes time, focus, attention, and the things that don't matter, typically the things that entertain us, they're usually not all that important, Yeah.
Well, KR, I asked Michael Apted, the movie director, 40 years ago, I go, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented a rapid montage in 1922 in France, but in the 80s, it flourished with MTV to the point where Marty Scorsese said, I cut my films faster because of MTV. Wow. Michael Apted said, because we've learned to take in information faster. So I asked this question with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And when you get the answer, let me know.
Well, it's funny how much I get it both ways, because the way I really ask it with a nudge, like we've been brainwashed to believe.
I know.
And, people, even Craig Baldwin says, well, Evelyn Wood reading, speed reading, that we took in information faster. So anyways,
I'm with you 100%. And I don't know. I think a big reason I left the public school classroom comes down to issues like this one. There's just a way I teach, a style I teach, when it comes to writing and rabbit holing in beautiful literature together with them. I don't know that I fit into where education is going on the mainstream level. And this idea about fast learning and is one of them. I don't know.
You mean rabbit holing as in take the time to delve deep and not just like, fast. Yeah. Because the really hidden question, KR, is it literally possible for humans to multitask?
I've heard it's not. I've heard that the science says it's a false phenomenon. It's like, I know that the older I get and maybe the more I'm on a screen and perhaps sobriety. I joke that sobriety has made me slow. Whiskey was sort of keeping the wheels turning in some strange way. It's totally a joke, but I cannot multitask. And often I end up, my dyslexia is back in full effect, not just on the page, but actually on the page, it's back seldomly, but in life, I'm very dyslexic. I flip things around without knowing that I did. And it's strange. So multitasking is a dangerous zone for me.
Yeah. Me too. I'm Lex Dixon. What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Oh, wow. You and these bombs. The difference? You know what I'm drawn to is like how they're similar.
Okay, no, then what? Go ahead.
Well, I think there's such a gift in responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, and I think having responsibility is a human right that I think that we take for granted. Back to your questions around capitalist culture and where we're going as a system.
Yeah.
We're made to think of responsibility as burden, as something we're forced to do. When meanwhile, like a lot of the things I'm responsible for are the things that nourish my life the most. This could be students. This could be my poetry community and getting a manuscript done. This could be my family. My family's the big one right now. I'm, for the first time in my adult life, living near them, at least part-time. And I thought I would resent it. I thought that I would feel like, I don't, because I never fit in down in Southern California growing up whatsoever. And when I discovered the Bay Area very young, I was like, this is home. And it's always been my home. It will always be my home. But I'm surprised to discover that being down here near my dad and near my siblings and their children, it has been so beautiful. And the responsibilities I have to my family with regard to showing up and, doing something nice for them, or maybe holding some kind of space for them. These things reveal themselves to be gifts, or in another way to say it, a human right.
Yeah.
And I feel like when people live a life without responsibility, we see just how sad it looks, and we're watching a system fail, and there's mass amounts of people without responsibility that we see on the street. And it taps into their human right violations.
Yeah. That's, it's so important. You're a listener, and I'm open to rewording the questions. Just because I word a question a certain way, it's just a prompt. Because the next one is, what's the difference between rebellion and revolution?
Well, I mean, rebellion may not have anything to propose, right?
Yeah.
Rebellion might not have a vision. Rebellion might just be an FU middle finger.
Yeah.
I do try to choose my words in a podcast, not because I don't see the value in swearing, but I just do. But rebellion might not have a vision, and as we know, just by virtue of studying reform and where it's taking us, changing laws without changing attitudes, for example, is a really good window into what makes any so-called improvements we've made not revolutionary. They're a revolutionary is going to have something to propose.
Yeah.
A better way to live, right?
Yeah. It's so good. Like I said, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right, because the word is there, re-evolution. Rebellion, we know something's wrong. We know how there could be an evolution with, we got a new strategy.
And rebellion, I mean, an optimist, I said something a little critical about rebellion, but to be clear, rebellion can be a tactic that takes us to revolutionary places. Having a shutdown, having a strike, having, these are things that, so rebellion has its place.
Yep.
Yeah.
So John Basil Barnhill, socialist, said, where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. In 2005, V for Vendetta, the movie, paraphrased it. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. How do you personally handle false fears like the war on drugs? Okay, you can't have a war on drugs because drugs can't fight, and you can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. So, these false fears, the war on poverty, the war on terrorism, and the war on drugs. How do you personally handle false fears?
Whew. I think I'm still figuring that out. I think the big one for me, I'm going to be really honest, the big one for me is learning who to have the conversation with and who not to have the conversation with because they're committed to not understanding, but I certainly think how I handle it is staying linked both artistically and practically and temporally to communities that sort of, for lack of a better word, rebel against those narratives, and then have a revolutionary sort of reaction to it by the events they put on. Like last night, this engaging in communities that show something else is possible.
Yeah.
Is a big way that I react. A good example. I mean, I love this question because it's a real thing more than ever, in my opinion. But maybe that's easy for me to say. The big one is like the way people are viewing San Francisco and what's happening up there down here in Southern California. And people that have an addiction to mainstream news sources and not just the like right wing conglomerates.
Just the normal mainstream.
The normal mainstream. If you wouldn't know better, it's on fire up there and it's the zombie apocalypse and everything's going to shit and and I breathe and I say very calmly, you should watch these news sources. You should go visit. Yes, I'm not going to, we have to be very real and sober and humble about what is going wrong in that beautiful, precious city I call home. And there's an arrogance there and a sort of ego defensiveness with natives, like, whoa, we're fine. Like the tech's gone, good riddance. Like, and there are things going on there that are problematic. But if you look at what is dangerous, what is really damaging, it's a small little sector of the city. And the rest of the city is not a zombie apocalypse. There are normal families still there. There are artists. Oh my gosh, the artists holding it down there are Vikings, and as far as I'm concerned, could save the nation.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of example of what you've asked me of this sort of narrative that the news has created. Yeah. And it's so electoral inspired. It's like these little tactics they use to get people to vote this way and that way. And I'm going to stay part of the solution communities.
Good. It's two really quick things. New Atlantis, this magazine, put out a huge article on how Jon Stewart spawned Tucker Carlson. And because they turned the news investigative journalism business into $25 million business.
Yes.
Now, Jon Stewart didn't, he didn't go, I'm going to spawn this. But then they go, well, if you're going to do that, we can do it on this end too. So that's one thing that's changed because, we believe we believed Walter Cronkite, and we wanted to believe that it was true. But then it's the Burning Man situation with the mud, a couple weeks ago. I met a guy who just drove 20 or 15 hours from Burning Man, and he was at this dinner party, and he goes, how was it? He goes, it's fine. But if you looked at the news, it was like, oh my God. He goes, now, and so I loved hearing that, because I'm sure I goes, how many years have you gone? He goes, 10. So in 10 years, he's gotten used to the ups and downs, but in the news, we got a little different.
My favorite part of that story is the Burning Man guy at the dinner party. and that's all I have to say about Burning Man.
Actually, it wasn't. I got to correct myself. It's a restaurant in Venice once a month feeds the neighborhood free food.
That's different than a
I
dinner
know it is. And it was like, what? I don't. Yeah, anyway.
I pictured a dinner party.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I shouldn't be so critical. I've never been to Burning Man. Yeah.
It is funny how we do just what I do what just the news does. We kind of try to encapsulate things in words to strunk them down so you can say them quicker than give every little fine detail. But that's good. You busted me good there. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Can't choose between those two.
Yeah.
I think what's important is balancing them.
Yeah.
I think both are critical. I think compromise. We can. One of our convictions can be compromised.
Yeah.
But I also think some things cannot be compromised.
Yeah.
So.
You've accomplished a lot. How do you rate these three elements, luck, skill, and ambition? What played the biggest role, second and third?
Luck, skill, ambition. Oh, man. I think luck is at the top of that list. I do. I've been so blessed. And a lot of it has to do with having Kim Shuck in my life, for one, Richard Modiano, Rich Fergus. I mean, to know people that open doors for me.
Yeah.
That I learn a lot from. And I don't know. It's so hard to say because, of course, skill is up there with luck. I work really hard on what I submit and what I put out there. I don't just like go out and hear myself recite something. Everything is just so carefully worked on. I have 2 manuscripts in the Cauldron right now, for example, that are so long overdue to be submitted, and I'm just not ready. One in particular that I was going to call Lady Viking. It's a chapbook devoted to the divine feminine. I don't know that that's going to be the name now. It's starting to tell me it wants to be called some other things that I'm going to keep close to my vest. But that manuscript is a good example. I'm on my 5th revision. And so I guess skill, maybe before luck also. I don't know. It's hard to place them because they all serve the role. I think that there are some things not on the list, though. Am I ambitious? I don't know. I just don't know who else to be. And I've never done things. Anyone that knows me in a personal capacity, friends, family, lovers, it's like I do things with all of me. And I guess that is ambition, but I don't know that I would characterize what's got me here due to my ambition. It's more,
Yeah, people add other words sometimes: persistence, purpose, necessity. So that was good, KR. I appreciate it. T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
What language is my inner dialogue in? Oh, warfare. My inner language is in the language of warfare.
That was heavy warfare.
Yeah. I'd love to say it's some like dead pagan language, but I don't know. There's more. There's definitely a lot of languages within me. Language has been such a precious spiritual tool for me. And it's funny, I'm reminded of it. I remember being young and having conflicts with friends, and I'd write them like a 3-page letter, and I'm known to be long-winded when I love you. It's quite genuinely this hope and optimism in the power of language, and like the way it holds love, and it holds resolution, and it holds revolution, and in the instance of these stories, a revolution in that friendship or that lovership or whatever. And then the world will sort of knock me on my ass and go, that's too long. I'm not reading all that. Or like, what did you mean by this word?
No, I write, my emails are so long, and when people go, it's too long, I said, just read the first 2 lines. Nope, they won't read any if they see that it's too long. I'm the same way. I'm a maximalist. George Manupelli, my film heroes, their mantras are ignore yourself. Jonas Mika says there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self-expression or more your vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
I'm in the camp of the latter quote. I mean, if I'm doing it right, I stay out of the way.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does express what I want to express. And maybe that's why it picked me,
Yeah. And we talked about this a lot in part 1, and it's very deep, but I have to ask the question, because the real hidden question to that question is, can art making be egoless?
Ooh. Oh, yeah. $1 million question.
We did do this question because you said, then I said, these women said, oh, it has to be. Okay, let's move on then. Because we just refer to part 1, because it's really deep how well you articulate that. Okay, I'm glad you have good memory. I don't. Is perception reality?
Well, I don't know how we can know otherwise.
Yeah.
I mean, not to get all Berkeley on you, that philosopher to be, but I mean, I don't know. Back to the ego question. It's like, take a lot of ego to be like, well, of course. I don't know that we'd know otherwise,
Lewis Carroll said, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Oh, yeah. Several. Yes. I think
well, tell us one.
A nationwide shutdown of America as we know it.
Yeah.
The problem is, and this is back to why it's so relevant to this particular question and why it's impossible, is I think the powers that be have successfully generated a culture of people that would much rather set this place on fire than propose something new.
Yeah.
And not to say that fire doesn't have its purpose, but back to rebellion and revolution, it's like, I think there's the powers that be have cultivated a culture that doesn't know what to propose, that's distracted, that's prioritizing a lot of things that actually don't nourish their soul. And so I feel like my people talk about like the strikes, and they talk about a resistance movement, or they talk about a shutdown or whatever, and I get tremendous fear when I think about it, because I don't see a culture prepared to organize and to create something new. In fact, I see everybody treading water with their noses just above the storm if that were to happen, and no real proposal about like what to become, because the right left narrative is winning. And when I say left, I don't mean our version of left. I mean Democrats. And as far as I'm concerned, they're every bit of part of the problem as the atrocious fascist counterpart, So yeah, I mean, that's an impossible one that I think about a lot. Like a nation that's finally back to its native roots and in the divine feminine and in a sort of tribal village culture and color, and that's something that I love to think about, and why I end up at Kim Shuck's table all the time getting fed. And so
fill in the blank, K.R. Anger can be a productive emotion when
you want to find your grief. Anger can be a productive emotion when you want to locate your grief, the source of your grief. Anger is always an invitation to look at yourself.
Yeah. That is so well put. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Mm-hmm. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Oh boy. A weakness I turned into a strength. Oh, my imposter syndrome. I'm learning how to integrate it. It's a very Christian idea to like look at our weaknesses as like bad things that we're born with it. We must like feel shame and guilt. It's like I'm starting to sort of do an autopsy of my imposter syndrome as to why it's there. And what I'm finding at its surface is my capacity to stay a student, to to stay humble, to stay learning. I'm by no means a hot shot,
But it is cool. See, you've been an educator for so many years, but if you can still say I'm a student, I mean, that's what McLuhan said his whole career. I'm just a student. I'm a student. But no, you're the teacher. It's the joke, he used to say. The mom goes to the guy, he's in bed. Says, you got to get up. It's time to go to school. Because I don't want to go to school. You got to go to school. It's time to go to school, the mom yells. I don't want to. She goes, you got to go. You're the principal.
That's cute.
Okay, you create what you resist. I'm not saying you, but there's a saying that goes, one creates what one resists. Bob Goldthwait morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve.
Ooh, I love that.
And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So any thoughts on this line, you create what you resist. One creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that?
Well, back to what I said earlier, I think often when we create anything, it's invitations into ourselves. It's like, or who's that person that said our greatest fear is is our light. Like, our greatest fear is not that we're inadequate, but our greatest fear is actually our light. I think that when we resist something, there's a fear and there's a hesitancy. And then that fear and hesitancy is really a clue. It's like, oh, what are you afraid of? Like, what are you just terrified to unravel? Because there's something really frightening about revising ourselves and, and looking at things differently, or like running into failure. And, so.
Frank Zappa's line is my favorite. I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure. If you can admit it and work with it and flip a rejection into a redirection, a breakdown into a breakthrough.
And it's also always perspective. Like, I think one of the greatest dangers about like social media culture is like we're all sharing these great things. Sometimes we share not great things. But like I fail every day. Like I have to-do lists and I have things that I aspire to get done and they don't get done. And then meanwhile, I'm not failing in a lot of other things. And I'm here with you on a podcast on a Sunday. Like there's things I fail at every day.
Yeah. How do you find peace of mind?
Community, creative community, poems, writing them, sharing them, hearing them, banging on a drum kit.
Yeah.
Also, my moon witchcraft. I mean, none of this is happening without me in a daily practice that nourishes my sobriety, because not drinking is such a small component of sobriety. It's really the daily choice to choose your higher self and to generate ritual that allows you to stay connected to your higher self, and to phase like the way the moon does into the things that you need to shed to get there and the things that you need to manifest to get there. That is how I get to peace of mind, for sure. And it's the only church that's ever worked for me.
Wow. Few more and we're out of here. Thank you so much, KR. These are 5 quick Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in just a couple words. 1, who started it all?
I don't know. I like my rebellious side is coming out and like I'm thinking terrible things. Who started it all? I'm going to say back to that, not you.
2, are we going to make it?
Yes.
3, where do we put it?
In your soul pocket.
Beautiful. 4, who's cleaning it up?
Who's cleaning it up? The artists and the poets.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, 5, is it serious?
Sometimes.
Yeah. Very good. If you were walking down the street today and you met, excuse me, and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
It's not you, baby girl. They're just wounded.
That's good. Is that a line from a poem or a song?
It's a line from one of my poems. I write to that little girl all the time, and it's part of my practice. She was very hurt. She's very, very brokenhearted. And so I would say to her, it's not you, baby girl. They're just wounded.
It's really good. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
I don't care.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be? That's a good title right there.
Yeah.
How do you put that? How do you put that on the page?
The title would be Moon Daughter.
Nice. They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
Wait, say that again.
They want to scent. The publisher wants to scent the glue in the binding of your autobiography. What smell?
Rosemary.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed, and what would it be made of?
Oh, geez. I would want it displayed. I would want it displayed on a coral reef, at some random nameless ocean that you can't really get to.
Oh, I like that.
And what was the second part? What is it made of?
Yeah.
Coral.
Yeah.
Or sea foam. Let's go with sea foam. It's made out of sea foam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Being comfortable.
That's a great answer. It's good. You've never had it and you never want it. That is really a great answer.
I have never been comfortable.
Yeah.
I'm just in the perpetual state of being uncomfortable. And I'm at the age now where I'm good with that.
Yeah.
It's led to some good things.
Yeah.
So
what's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Feminine energy.
Yeah.
I see divine feminine peeking through this era in response to what is a crumbling patriarchy.
Yeah. What question remains unresolved for you?
So many. So many. I'll just pick one question that remains unresolved. I don't know. It's like too big.
Yeah.
Do I feel at home? The pandemic allowed me the gift to let go of a very precious home. And by home, I mean my physical home in San Francisco that I love very much. And it was a huge loss. And I think I'm so used to things ending in conflict that losing something not in conflict made me assume it was wrong to let it go. And the truth is, I needed to let it go to make room for the universe to bring me new definitions of what constitutes home, what constitutes nest, new definitions of space. And I'm finding that my greatest peace of mind is coming from living in transitions and being both in the Bay and being down here by the ocean and my familia. Like that mixture, I feel that's my real estate, I don't remember the question now, but I somehow
it was good. I asked you what question remains unresolved for you, and you said, "Do I feel at home?"
Yeah, I think
that's a good question. That we all, I mean, everybody's wanting to feel at home.
Yeah,
do I feel at home is a question.
Yeah, I am I am a moon baby at heart mixed with Libra. And so Cancer and Libra are like all over my chart, which is different conversation, natal charts. But I love a fireplace. I love an ancestor altar. I have this nesting ingredient about me, but I also cannot sit still. So I think what's still up in the air for me is what home's going to look like.
Yeah.
And how will I sustain it?
John Cage has a great response. You go, do I feel at home? He goes, that's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to steal that. Who said that? John Cage?
John Cage, any question anyone ever asks you, you can just say, that's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with the answer. That is such a great comeback.
It is.
Yeah.
I used to tell my students, sometimes the question's more important than the answer,
Hello. And so a couple more, we're done. Okay. How has being creative in playing music, drumming, writing poetry, and educating, how has that shaped your behavior? How has your creativity shaped your behavior?
Empathy.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like a chicken and the egg thing for me, whether or not I am just empathic or if art, creative life makes me that way, or if they just nourish one another or what. But, the ability to be a vessel and absorb what's around you, and then learning how to set boundaries with that when you need to. I think being an artist is really soundtracked that journey of being an empath, and the word gets really overused,
Yeah.
And we're like, one of my favorite spiritual teachers, she talks about how, empaths are really just trauma kids. Like, they're kids that went through upbringings where they needed to read the room to be safe.
Yeah.
And so I think being an artist has given me a way to, like, not just access the room in a healthier way than I did as a kid, but like inform it and speak to it and maybe hopefully help someone else.
Yeah.
With.
Yeah. KR, I had heard one of the biggest video game makers ever. He made this video game that's just this mountain. It's like sort of stupid, but he's really huge. He said, fuck storytelling. It's all empathy. And I just love that. I mean, of course there's a little both, but I just love, because, like you said, it's overused, but hey, overuse that word all you want in my book. Like empathy, empathy, empathy. That's it. So this is two more. Okay. Thornton Wilder in 1928 said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time.
Oh,
You've laid your cards on the table for hours. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
I love that description.
Thornton Wilder nailed it. It's amazing.
There's this unfolding, but there's also what you keep for you,
That's it.
And and then there's something else that happens. It's just not in your hands. That could be either or both. And I can't help but go back to Richard Modiano, because he had me on a podcast where he talked about, I think I might have brought this up last time I was with you, but a good poem does three things. And I think that this quotation is touching on that. There's something that the poet sees in their poem that a reader, it's not there for the reader.
Yeah.
I love that quotation. And
but the three things are, the poem is for the self, for the reader, and then what's the third?
That's escaping me now.
It's sort of like that otherness.
Yes, that's right. It's the otherness. It's something, there's what the writer is doing for the reader. There's what the writer is doing for themselves. And then there's something that the poem is doing beyond all of that.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it's like, and this is where being a poet gets so spiritual for me. There's a sort of mind, body, soul, death, life, rebirth. For Christians, it would be the Trinity, this sort of law, this law of three, this triquetra for a witch, of this sort of function of three things that create,
KR, it sort of reminds me of what your mom told you. It's not yours. Once the artist makes their art, it's no longer theirs. The user can do anything they want with it. Oh, you misinterpret it. So that, go. I mean, you can't control how they're going to use it, but it is that amazing. It's called, if you read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people, it's called A Living Organism. It's a bubbling, it's like a cauldron, living organism. It's like, I always say, we could be reading People magazine. It doesn't matter what we're reading. It's just that we're a bunch of people together, banging ideas.
It's why I said that luck might be at the top of my list.
Yeah.
Because I've had people read poems I read and they tell me what they received. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Cool. Like, if I acted like I intended that, I'd be a big fat liar.
Yeah.
And there's something really beautiful and extraordinary, whether it be the form or the craft or something that they found in it that I didn't intend for. And that's pretty cool. To be an agent for that is really special and its own kind of currency,
Yep.
So
what gives you the most optimism?
Creative community. I hate to be so redundant, but when I'm like having conversations like this one, or when I'm at events like the one at Beyond Baroque last night, these give me the most optimism. Also, though, I have a lot of youth in my life, and they give me optimism. Especially the ones that are really fighting to think outside the boxes they're offered. The one that comes to mind is my niece. She's a painter, and to hear her talk about things and to talk about life, to hear her see through the BS, it gives me a lot of hope. And I think we're in an era where we need to see versions of her, because we look at what's happening and we're like, oh my God, they're doomed. They're doomed. What are they going to inherit? And I think we underestimate them, and we underestimate what's possible because of them, because they are being delivered a plate of bullshit. And I think we underestimate humanity when we think that there aren't young people that are going to look at that and go, no, that's not for me. You know?
KR, that's the answer I get the most. What gives you the most optimism is, they say, youth. People say young people, youth. And, the first question I asked at the beginning of part one was, what's the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich says the best thing for a human being is another human being. And the last question is, what gives you the most optimism? That's what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he said, other people. So it's sure been enlightening and a pleasure to spend this time with another person, especially because it was you, KR. I mean it. And I'll give you this special bonus one. Is McLuhan said it so well. He said, communication of the new is a miracle, but it's not impossible. So, I really felt I learned a lot of newness here. And it was really great spending this time. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this truly never ends and we can keep communicating and talking forever and ever.
I would love that. I really appreciate you having me on here with you. And I feel like if there were more of this going on in the world, that alone would be its own healer, you know, asking people to think about these profound questions, you know.
I love it.
Stretching.
Suggest anyone you want, because I always need people. I'm booked up for a couple months, but I have a lot of dates in January, February, and March that are open.
Cool. I'll think of who to send your way.
Please do, KR. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jerry.
Love
Bye.
you. Bye.